The snow lay silent that afternoon, a thin white skin stretched across a forest floor scarred by 2 days of desperate fighting. Smoke drifted between the bare trees, carrying the faint metallic scent of burning steel. Somewhere beyond the mist, engines growled a deep, deliberate sound that told every man listening exactly what was coming. And in the shallow cut of a frozen drainage ditch, one young officer understood that the next hour would decide whether anyone under his command survived at all. 6 armored silhouettes were moving toward the woods, their tracks grinding through the ice. Behind them, a wave of infantry in white camouflage advanced across the open field. 18 exhausted Americans waited in the trees, down to their last ammunition, facing an attack designed to break more than a line. It was meant to shatter the last Allied foothold guarding the road to Germany. What compels a man barely 19 to stand his ground against a force that should have crushed him in minutes? What turns a burning vehicle, moments from exploding, into the final refuge of a soldier determined not to lose the ground beneath his feet? To answer that, we must return to the winter of 1945, where destiny narrowed to a single clearing in a French forest, and one impossible stand began. The battle that unfolded in the forest near Holtzwihr did not begin with heroism. It began with exhaustion. For 2 days, Company B had pushed through frozen woods, where the ground was so hard that even seasoned infantrymen could not dig proper foxholes. Every step forward had been paid for in blood. 102 men killed or wounded before the unit ever reached the position they were ordered to hold. By the morning of January 26, only 18 remained, scattered among the trees like the last embers of a dying fire. The terrain itself seemed determined to defeat them. The Bader Reed forests clung to the eastern edge of the Colmar Pocket, the final German stronghold west of the Rhine. Whoever controlled these woods controlled the narrow road that cut through them, a lifeline for Allied forces advancing north, and a gateway that German armor would exploit if it fell. Snow muffled sound but did nothing to conceal the hulking silhouettes that often emerged from the tree line. Tanks probing for weak points, infantry testing the American defenses, artillery feeling out the range. Higher command understood the risk with painful clarity. The Colmar Pocket had resisted Allied pressure since November 1944. Its collapse would open the path toward Germany itself. Its survival would prolong a brutal winter and cost thousands more lives. For the 3rd Infantry Division, holding the woods near Holtzwihr was not a tactical choice. It was an obligation woven into the success of their entire campaign. Into this crucible stepped a 19-year-old officer who had never asked for command. Hours earlier, he had been a platoon leader. By dawn, he was the last surviving officer in the company. Responsibility had found him through attrition. One by one, the veterans who had carried Company B through North Africa, Sicily, and Italy had fallen. Now he alone had to hold a position that had already shattered a larger and better supplied unit. As he studied the fog-bound clearing ahead, the signs of what was coming became unmistakable. Tracks in the snow, the low growl of engines approaching from Holtzwihr. Movement, disciplined, deliberate, spreading wide. The enemy was not probing now. They were committing. 6 Panzer V tanks were advancing in 2 wedges, supported by a full complement of infantry in white winter camouflage. The attack was not designed to pressure the line. It was designed to break it. American doctrine was clear. When outnumbered and outgunned, a small unit should fall back, regroup, and fight another day. But retreat here meant surrendering the road, inviting enemy armor to drive directly into the regimental command post barely a mile behind them. If Company B withdrew, the entire sector could collapse. 18 men, 6 tanks, 250 infantry, and one narrow strip of road that could not be lost. As the German formation emerged fully from the mist, the young officer understood that the opening moves of this battle had already been decided. There would be no retreat, not today. The German assault began with a kind of cold precision that only seasoned soldiers recognize. Artillery whistled overhead, exploding in the frozen woods behind Company B's line, shaking loose branches heavy with ice. The barrage was not meant to destroy the Americans outright. It was meant to pin them, to blind them, to ensure that when the tanks arrived, nothing would stand in their way. From the edge of the trees, the first M10 tank destroyer opened fire. Its 3-inch gun punched a shell across 700 yards, striking the lead Panzer head-on. The round skipped off the tank's angled armor, a harmless flash against plate steel. A moment later, the German 88 returned the gesture with brutal efficiency. Fire burst from the M10's crew compartment. Its hatch flew open. Men tumbled out and sprinted toward the tree line as the vehicle burned behind them. The second M10, positioned farther to the rear, fared no better. Flames licked at its engine deck, the smell of burning fuel spreading across the clearing. Any rational soldier would have avoided the smoldering machine, a steel coffin waiting to erupt. But the young officer knew something the Germans did not. The 50 caliber machine gun mounted on its turret still stood intact, its ammunition box untouched by the fire. The situation deteriorated with brutal speed. German infantry flooded into the no man's land between the village and the woods, scattering into shell craters as American artillery found its rhythm. They pressed forward in waves, white parkas melting into the snow until rifle flashes betrayed their advance. At 400 yards, their outlines sharpened. At 300, their machine pistols began to chatter. Company B's thin line lit up with rifle and carbine fire. But it was clear to everyone in those trees that small arms alone would never stop armored steel. Realizing the line would soon be overrun, the officer made a choice that defied doctrine, logic, and survival instinct. He ordered his men to fall back deeper into the forest, to positions where they could regroup and avoid annihilation. Then, with the field telephone in one hand, he ran alone toward the burning M10, weaving through explosions and rifle bursts that cracked the air around him. Reaching the tank destroyer, he hauled himself onto the scorched hull, feeling the heat through his gloves. Smoke poured from the open turret. Inside, visibility shrank to a haze of firelight and choking fumes. But the 50 caliber was still there, steady, loaded, and capable of reaching every German soldier on the field. He climbed onto the turret roof, pulled the charging handle back, and set his shoulders behind the weapon. The first burst tore across the clearing like a thunderclap. German infantry dove instinctively, but there was nowhere to hide. Tracer fire stitched the snow, cutting through squads that had moments earlier believed the burning vehicle to be irrelevant. Shell casings ricocheted off the turret and rolled toward his feet, burning through the cloth of his trousers. Still he fired, sweeping left, then right, punishing every attempt to flank the position. Artillery answered his shouted coordinates between bursts. Shells landed behind the panzers, isolating them from their infantry support. The battlefield narrowed to a single point. One man, one machine gun, and a storm of steel advancing from all sides. For nearly an hour, he held. The moment of greatest danger came without warning. An 88mm round struck the M10's hull just below the officer's position, lifting the entire vehicle with a violent jolt. Hot metal fragments tore through the air. One shot punched into his leg, and for an instant the world narrowed to fire, smoke, and the sharp sting of pain spreading through his boot. He looked down only long enough to see blood darkening the wool, then lifted his eyes again to the field. The Germans were still coming. At 150 yards, he could see their faces now. Young men struggling forward through snow, churned red and brown. Some were terrified, others resolute, all of them caught in the grinding logic of an assault that no longer made sense. They pressed on because their orders demanded it, because the tanks behind them expected it, because retreat under fire was often deadlier than advancing. But each burst from the 50 caliber sent bodies tumbling, scattering the formations that had moments earlier looked unbreakable. When German squads attempted to cross a drainage ditch on his right, he pivoted the heavy machine gun and cut them down before they could close the last few yards. When another group tried to use a cluster of trees for cover on the left, he shattered branches and bark with controlled bursts, leaving the ground beneath them littered with splinters and bodies. Every maneuver the infantry attempted met the same answer: steel, smoke, and the relentless hammering of the Browning. The panzers struggled to bring him into their sights, but the burning M10 sat in a shallow depression. Smoke rolled over the turret in thick waves, obscuring him from the German gunners. They fired again and again, each impact rocking the hull, each explosion threatening to send the ammunition inside into a catastrophic detonation. But none found the man behind the gun. As the infantry thinned, their resolve faltered. Soldiers who had advanced with determination now hesitated at the open field, refusing to leave their craters. Others crawled back toward Holtzwihr, dragging wounded comrades through the snow. Without infantry support, the tanks became exposed. In close terrain, armor alone was vulnerable, something every German commander on the field understood. When the lead panzer rotated its turret and began backing away, the rest followed. What had begun as a coordinated assault dissolved into a retreat. The officer fired his last belt into the fleeing ranks, then released the trigger as the bolt locked back. For the first time in an hour, the battlefield fell silent except for the crackle of the fire beneath him. His leg buckled when he climbed down. He staggered through the snow, dragging the field telephone with him. 30 yards away, the M10 erupted. The blast tore the turret free and hurled it through the air, flames clawing 100 feet upward. If he had stayed atop the vehicle a few seconds longer, no trace of him would have remained. Reaching the edge of the woods, he found his 18 men emerging from the trees, every one of them alive. He refused medical evacuation. The enemy was fleeing, disorganized. This was the moment to reclaim the ground they had lost. Under his direction, Company B advanced once more into the clearing. There was no further resistance. The Germans were gone. By the end of the day, the Americans held their position. By the next afternoon, Holtzwihr fell. 2 weeks later, the Colmar Pocket collapsed entirely. 1 hour on a burning tank destroyer had helped shift the momentum of a campaign that had resisted Allied efforts for months. In the days that followed, the story of what happened near Holtzwihr began to filter upward through the American chain of command. Reports from surviving riflemen, artillery officers, and Staff Sergeant Elmer Brawley all aligned. A single officer had held an entire German assault at bay, long enough for his men to survive and for the line to hold. But in the broader context of the war, the implications stretched far beyond one battlefield. For American commanders, the action at Holtzwihr highlighted a reality that doctrine often struggled to capture: the power of individual initiative. The U.S. Army had long emphasized unit cohesion, coordinated maneuver, and disciplined withdrawal when outnumbered. Yet here was an instance in which one soldier, armed with a burning tank destroyer and a field telephone, had altered the outcome of a divisional operation. In the months following the battle, leadership programs at regimental and divisional levels cited the event as evidence that battlefield judgment, when rooted in experience and clarity of purpose, could outweigh rigid adherence to doctrine. This understanding eventually found its way into the curriculum of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Cadets studied the engagement not as a tale of recklessness, but as a case study in calculated risk when a commander may choose to sacrifice himself to preserve his unit, and how moral responsibility and tactical necessity can converge in the span of a few seconds. The lesson was not that courage alone wins battles, but that courage paired with situational mastery can reshape the course of a fight. Internationally, the legacy took a more tangible form. In the village of Holtzwihr, the people who witnessed the destruction of their homes and the liberation of their streets erected a memorial at the precise site where the stand occurred. The sculpture and stone marker face the same open ground where German armor once advanced. The forest line remains nearly unchanged, a quiet reminder that even vast campaigns sometimes hinge on a single clearing and a solitary figure refusing to move. Yet perhaps the most enduring consequence emerged far from the snow of 1945. In the decades after the war, the officer who survived that hour on the M10 became one of the first public voices in America to speak openly about the psychological wounds carried by combat veterans. His testimony before Congress and his advocacy within the Veterans Administration helped lay the groundwork for what the nation would eventually recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. The soldiers he saved at Holtzwihr were not the only ones whose lives he would touch. When the smoke finally cleared from the forest near Holtzwihr, the battlefield revealed no triumphal banners, no crowds, no fanfare. Only the quiet aftermath remained: shattered trees, frozen earth torn open by artillery, and the long shadows cast by lives that had nearly been lost. In that silence, the meaning of the stand became unmistakable. It was not about a single act of bravado. It was about the weight one soldier was willing to carry, so that the men behind him would never have to. The hour spent atop the burning M10 did more than repel an assault. It reshaped the idea of leadership under fire. It reminded commanders and future generations that courage is rarely loud, rarely clean, and never free. It comes with smoke in the lungs, wounds in the flesh, and years of memories that refuse to fade. The officer who stood in that blaze carried those memories long after the war ended, long after the applause faded, long after the medals were stored away. His struggle with the hidden wounds of combat would become a second fight, one fought not with weapons, but with honesty, vulnerability, and a determination to ensure that other veterans would not face their battles alone. Today, the clearing near Holtzwihr remains almost unchanged. The road still cuts across the field. The forest still rises along the eastern edge. In winter, snow settles over the ground just as it did in 1945. Visitors who stand at the memorial can trace the line of advance, feel the cold wind that once carried the sound of tanks, and understand, if only faintly, how narrow the margin between survival and destruction truly was. Perhaps that is the real legacy of the battle. The knowledge that history can pivot on the actions of a single individual at a moment when retreat feels easiest and resistance feels impossible. It is a reminder that courage often appears when there is no one left to witness it, and that the quiet resolve of one soldier can echo across decades. As you reflect on this story, consider the lessons that endure. What does leadership demand in moments when the odds are absolute? How do we honor those who return from battle carrying wounds unseen? And what responsibilities do we inherit from those who refuse to let their friends die on a frozen field far from home? If this history speaks to you, we invite you to join the conversation, share your thoughts, subscribe for more stories shaped by sacrifice, and help ensure that the men who fought in these forgotten corners of the world are never forgotten themselves.